The patrol was supposed to be nothing. That was the word Verithsol used in his log every third day. Nothing. Border Sector 7. Empty space, gas clouds, the occasional dead rock spinning around a dim star that nobody had bothered to name. He had been commander of this patrol route for 9 years, and the most interesting thing that had ever happened was a fuel leak in year 3 that killed 2 of his crew and earned him a commendation for calm handling of the situation. He was not a calm creature by nature. He had simply learned, out here, that there was nothing worth being uncalm about. Then the scout ship appeared. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of his sensor range, which meant it had been traveling at the kind of speeds his fleet used only in emergencies. It was small, embarrassingly small, the size of one of his patrol corvettes, which were themselves not large ships. It had a flat, ungainly shape, like something designed by a creature that had never quite made peace with the concept of aerodynamics. All angles and bolted-on sections, and what appeared to be a hull repair on the port side, done with a material of a slightly different color than the rest of the ship. The kind of repair you made when you were far from home and the original material wasn't available. His sensor operator, a young Keth named Velmoran, said at first, "It's civilian, Commander." Verithsol looked at the reading. Civilian-grade engines. Civilian power signature. Weapons, none, or none his sensors could find, which was not the same thing. But the distinction felt academic when looking at something this size. "Hail them," he said. They hailed. No answer. They hailed again, on 7 different frequencies, in the 4 languages of known spacefaring species. Still nothing. Verithsol thought about it for 12 seconds. In 9 years, nothing had ever hailed back either. He ordered the intercept. They disabled the ship cleanly. 1 pulse, targeted at the drive section. The kind of shot his gunners could do in their sleep. Had done in their sleep. Had done drunk at the end of cycle celebrations twice that he officially hadn't noticed. The ship went dead in space. No thrust. Emergency lighting only, drifting on its previous vector. He sent a boarding team, 8 soldiers, full armor, full weapons. The kind of team you sent when you genuinely expected nothing, because it was large enough to be safe and small enough not to be embarrassing. He watched the boarding feed from the bridge. The airlock opened. The team went in. What they found was a corridor so narrow 2 Keth soldiers couldn't walk abreast, lined with storage containers bolted to the walls, cables running along the ceiling in bundles that had been added at different times by the look of them. Some old, some new, all functional. None of them pretty. The smell was complex. Food smells, biological smells. The particular smell of a place where living creatures had been for a long time in an enclosed space. The team moved through it toward the main cabin. They found 12 creatures. The creatures were bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head on top. The basic configuration that showed up everywhere in the galaxy with depressing predictants, as if the universe had exactly one idea about ambulatory intelligence and kept reusing it. These were softer looking than most, no visible armor, no claws worth mentioning. They had patches of fiber growing from their heads in a range of colors, brown, black, something almost gold, and their faces were mobile in a way that Verithsol found faintly disturbing even through the camera feed, expressions moving across them like weather. The teams came in. The 12 creatures reacted. Verithsol had commanded enough operations to know what the reaction to a boarding looked like. Prey species panicked, scattering, pressing themselves to walls, making high sounds. Predator species attacked, or made the gestures of attacking, a bluff designed to buy space. Intelligent species with military training dropped into defensive configurations and reached for weapons. These 12 creatures did none of those things. 3 of them were already standing when the team entered. The rest rose from their positions in a way that was unhurried. Not slow, unhurried. There was a difference. Slow was the movement of something afraid to draw attention. Unhurried was the movement of something that had decided the situation did not require speed. They looked at the boarding team. The boarding team, 8 soldiers in full combat armor carrying weapons that could level a room, looked back. One of the creatures said something. Verithsol's translator, still calibrating on the new language, caught the tone, not the words. The tone was flat, measured, the tone of someone giving an assessment. Another creature answered, also flat, also measured. Then a third one made a sound that the translator flagged, after a 2-second processing delay, as humor, confidence, 34%. Verithsol stared at the flag. Humor. His soldiers were pointing weapons at them, and at least one of them had found something funny. The team leader, Grath Vel, a 15-year veteran who had once held a doorway alone for 20 minutes while the rest of the squad was pulled out, looked at the camera, looked back at the creatures, said over the command channel. "They're not doing anything, sir. I can see that. Should we bring them in?" They were brought aboard in groups of 4. The medical team was waiting. Standard intake, full biological scan, vital reading, physical assessment. The Keth needed to understand what they were dealing with before the commander's report went to Imperial Command. The first group came through the airlock. 3 of them were upright. One, a shorter one, with dark skin and a short growth of fiber on its head, had its arm held against its body in a way that the medical team's lead, a physician named Sothvel, immediately identified as a fracture, or at least significant structural damage to the limb. The joint was wrong. The angle was wrong. The creature was walking. It was not limping. It was not favoring the arm in a way that suggested it was managing the pain of a mild injury. The arm was, by any biological standard Sothvel had studied, in a state that should have been producing a significant distress response. The creature's face was showing something. Sothvel could not read the expression, not yet, but it was not what she would have called distress. It looked more like mild inconvenience. She ran the scan. The results came back and she read them twice. Soft tissue damage consistent with a dislocation that had been manually relocated, recently, within the last 2 hours, which meant that at some point after the boarding, possibly during the boarding, possibly just before, this creature had taken its own dislocated joint and pushed it back into place, by itself, without assistance. Sothvel looked at the creature. The creature looked back at her with eyes the color of soil and said something. The translator, still building its model of the language, spat out a partial "Fine, already." And then a gap. "I can't understand yet," Sothvel said. The creature made a face, a very brief, very expressive movement that the translator flagged as exasperation 71%. She moved to the second group. The burns were worse. A larger creature, broad across the shoulders, with burns covering the left side of its face and neck. Old burns, not from today, healed over in the distinctive way that burns healed when they weren't treated with any particular sophistication, scarring in thick lines that pulled slightly at the corner of the eye. Someone had put some kind of local treatment on them at some point, and then the creature had apparently gotten on with things. The creature stood straight, looked at the scanner with what the translator called curiosity, confident 82%. Sothvel ran every biological measure she had. The report she eventually filed read in its clinical section: species presents as biologically unprepared for an aggressive environment. Bone density lower than any known predatory species at equivalent size. Musculature insufficient for combat with comparably sized Keth. No natural armor, no natural venom. Thermal regulation system appears to depend heavily on specialized fiber covering and external heat sources, suggesting evolutionary origin in temperate, seasonally variable environment. Offensive physical capacity minimal. She paused at the end, then added, "Note, the above assessment is accurate and is also somehow inadequate. 3 of 12 subjects display evidence of significant recent physical trauma, fracture, burn scarring, blunt force bruising, and none of them are displaying distress signals consistent with those injuries. I do not have a category for this. I am flagging it for further review." While the medical team worked, Vareth Sol had the crew chief brought to the interrogation room. She was the one who had relocated her own shoulder. He'd been told that, and he watched her walk in, and he tried to find the evidence of it in the way she moved. He couldn't. She walked like the injury wasn't there. Like it was a fact about her past, not her present. She sat down across from him. The translator was good enough now, not perfect, but workable. He said, "What is your name?" She said, "Dara Osi, crew chief. Scout vessel. Perihelion." "What's yours?" He blinked, his species version of blinking, a slow membrane close, which he did not often do in front of subjects. "I am Commander Vareth Sol of the Keth Imperial Patrol, Border Sector 7. "Okay," she said, "just that." "Okay. You crossed into Keth Imperial territory." "We did, without authorization. We didn't know we needed any." He studied her. The expression on her face was alert, present. She was watching him the way his tactical officers watched a developing situation on screen, not with fear, not with aggression, but with the specific attention of a creature that was building a model of what it was seeing. "You are not afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. He meant it as an accusation. It didn't land that way. "I'm aware of our situation," she said. "Is that the same thing? Your ship is disabled. You are aboard a military vessel. Your crew is outnumbered and unarmed." "Yes. And you are not afraid." She looked at him for a moment. The translator caught something in the micro-expression, a flicker of something behind the alertness, something the system flagged as Amusement. Confidence secondary read recognition. Confidence 31%. Commander, she said, I've had worse Tuesdays. He did not know what a Tuesday was. The translator left the word untouched, but the shape of the sentence was clear enough. He moved on. He asked about their mission. She said exploration, a word that scanned as genuine. He asked about their government. She described something large, many worlds, organized. She spoke about it the way one speaks about a parent, with a specific combination of familiarity and vast scale that comes from growing up inside something you cannot fully see. He asked about their military. She paused, just for a moment. We have one, she said. What does it look like? Big, she said. And then she looked at a point slightly past his shoulder. The translator caught. Memory, confidence 58%. And she said, almost to herself, very big. He changed the subject. He asked about their population, their worlds, their history of contact with other species. She answered some of it, deflected some of it. She was good at deflecting. She made the deflections feel like answers. Gave him something real enough each time that he kept moving forward without noticing the shape of what she wasn't saying. 40 minutes in, one of his junior officers entered and placed a food ration on the table. Standard Keth military ration, the ones his crew ate twice a day. An offering or an experiment. He was curious what a biologically inferior creature made of Keth food. Dara-Osi picked it up, opened it, ate a portion with the expression of someone who had eaten worse things on purpose, and said, without any particular complaint, needs salt. He stared at her. She offered him the rest of it back. In the ship's communications bay, the beacon was still transmitting. It was a small thing. They'd found it on their third sweep of the perihelion. Not on the first, not on the second. It was built into the structure of the ship's hull in a way that made it look like part of the power regulation system to anyone who didn't know exactly what they were looking for. By the time they found it, it had been transmitting for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Vareth Sol looked at the device in his hands, then at the report on his screen. 4 hours and 11 minutes. He thought about the translation of Dara-Ose's expression in the interrogation room. Memory, confidence 58%. He thought about the way she had said, very big. He thought about the fact that she had not asked him at any point about rescue. He put the beacon down and opened his log and wrote his report to Imperial Command. He described the ship as rudimentary. He described the crew as biologically inferior. He recommended absorption into the labor class, the standard designation for species without the physical or technological capacity to present a meaningful military challenge. It was, by every measure he had available, the correct assessment. He filed it. The beacon kept transmitting into the dark. Nobody answered yet. But somewhere, far down the line of its signal, something had already heard it. And something was already moving. Kostren had a system. Every new species that came through Imperial intake got a file. The file got a number. The number went into the catalog fed the archive. The archive fed the War Council's quarterly threat assessment, and the War Council read approximately none of it. This was fine. The archive was not built to be read. It was built to exist, a monument to the Empire's thoroughness, which was its own kind of power. We have recorded you, the archive said to every species inside it. We have decided what you are. Kostren had been the one doing the deciding for 11 years. She was not a soldier, not a diplomat. She was what the Empire called an intake analyst, which meant she was the person who sat between the raw data and the official record and turned one into the other. She was good at it. She was fast. She had a particular talent for finding the load-bearing fact in a data pile, the one reading, the one report, the one number that told you what everything else meant. She opened the new file on a standard work cycle, third hour, with a cup of pressed grain liquid that had gone cold on her desk while she was finishing the previous intake, a species of hive builders from the Outer Rim, no threat, labor class assignment, done in 4 hours. The file number was 7714. She read Vareth Sol's report first. She always started with the field report, raw, unfiltered, the observations of someone who had actually been there. The field report was the closest thing to truth that intake ever received. Everything else was already interpretation. Vessel design rudimentary, species biologically inferior, recommend labor class. She flagged it, not to reject it, just to hold it open while she kept reading. She pulled the probe records next. The probes had been out there for 40 years, that was standard. The Empire seeded long-range observation probes ahead of its expansion. Boundary. Let them drift and record for decades, and then harvested the data when the expansion caught up. By the time you formally contacted a species, you already had a generation of their history on file. Most of the time this was useful. You knew their political structures, their warfare patterns, their resource consumption. You knew if they were worth absorbing or worth ignoring or worth removing before they became a nuisance. Cost-Trend started pulling the human probe records. There were a lot of them. The probes had been productive. 40 years of continuous observation of a species that was, to put it one way, busy. She started reading chronologically, the way she always did, building the picture from the oldest data forward. The oldest records were sparse. The humans were on a single planet, one world, one species, multiple subspecies in active competition with each other. Standard early development pattern. The probes recorded large structures, primitive energy signatures, radio wave emissions in enormous quantities. The humans, it appeared, loved to broadcast. They filled the electromagnetic spectrum around their planet with signals in hundreds of languages: music, data, argument, advertisement, story. You could hear them coming from 3 light-years away if you knew what to listen for. Cost-Trend noted that. Set it aside. She kept reading. Year 7 of observation. The probe stationed above the third planet recorded what the analyst on duty at the time had logged as large-scale internal aggression event, estimated casualties, significant, flagged for pattern monitoring. She pulled the full record, not the flag, the full record. What she found was a war, not a border conflict, not a regional suppression action. A full species, multi-front, multiple-year war fought across the entire surface of their single planet, with weapons that left chemical and radiological signatures the probe recorded for years afterward. She cross-referenced the population estimates from before and after. 80 million dead. She sat with that number for a moment. She had processed a lot of intake files. She knew what numbers like that did to a species: the demographic collapse, the infrastructure failure, the generational trauma that expressed itself in every behavioral metric for centuries afterward. She scrolled to the post-event records. 4 years later, the humans launched their first orbital vehicle. She went back, checked the date, checked it again. 4 years. From 80 million dead to first orbital vehicle. In 4 years. She pulled up the post-war population recovery data and read it slowly and carefully, and then she set it down on her desk and looked at the cold-pressed grain liquid and thought about something she couldn't name yet. She kept reading. Year 19 of observation. Another war. Smaller, regional, a few million dead. The probe recorded it, logged it, moved on. Cost-Trend moved on with it. Wars were common in early development species. What was not common was what came after. The humans rebuilt. Every time. Not slowly, not reluctantly. They rebuilt the way certain biological organisms repaired cellular damage. Fast, efficient, directed, as if the blueprint for functioning civilization was held somewhere in them below the level of conscious decision. Something in them just knew what a city was supposed to look like, what a road was supposed to do, how a hospital was structured, and that knowledge persisted across any level of destruction and came back up again and again and again. Year 26, a pandemic, species-wide. The probe data showed the biological spread and the mortality curve and the response. Chaotic at first, then organized, then methodical, then, in a way that made Cost-Trend's processing slow slightly. Innovative. They developed a countermeasure during the event itself, not after. During. While the thing was still killing them, they were also solving it. 2 tracks running at the same time, and when the countermeasure arrived, it spread almost as fast as the illness had. She was building a picture. She did not have a word for it yet. Year 31. First human vessel in space. Properly in space, not orbital, not local transit, actual interstellar capable drive, early model. Inefficient, but there. She pulled the design records from the probe scan. The ship was small and looked exactly like every early model interstellar vessel she had ever cataloged, built for the minimum viable mission, not for comfort, not for elegance, just for the one essential thing: getting out. She noted the date. 31 years after first observation. Less than 30 years after a species-level war that killed 80 million. She scrolled ahead. Year 38. 3 human vessels at the border. Explorers by the behavioral profile. No weapon signatures. They were looking at things. Recording. The probe that caught them was in passive mode. They didn't know it was there. She watched the recording of the humans watching the universe and tried to read their behavior, and what she read was not conquest. What she read was hunger. The specific hunger of a species that had run out of things to look at on its own planet and needed more. She set the probe records down. She needed the anomaly file. There was always an anomaly file. Old data that didn't fit anywhere. Things probes caught that the duty analysts couldn't categorize, and so they logged and tagged and left for later. The anomaly file for species 714 had one entry. It was 60 years old, predating the formal observation program, from a salvage probe that had been running passive collection in this sector when it picked up something unexpected. A human vessel. Adrift. No power signature. The salvage probe had flagged it as debris, and then on a second pass, upgraded the flag when its sensors detected a life sign inside. One life sign. The salvage probe wasn't equipped for contact. It logged and transmitted and moved on. The duty analyst who received the log had written 3 words. Signal, species unknown. Filed it, never followed up. Costren read the salvage probe's full sensor record. The ship had suffered catastrophic hull damage, the kind of damage that happened when you intersected with something solid at high speed. The main cabin was open to space. The drive section was gone. By any survival calculus, the crew, whoever they were, had been dead the moment it happened. The life sign was in a maintenance crawl space in the ship's interior, a section roughly 2 body lengths long and 1 body width wide, sealed from inside using emergency foam, the ship's equivalent of a creature sealing its burrow. The life sign was alive, barely. The probe's bioreaders showed a metabolic rate so low it registered as near dormancy. The human, one human, alone in a space the size of a closet, with no drive, no communications, no main cabin, no crew, had slowed their own body down and survived for 9 days. The salvage probe's final reading on the life sign, stable. Then it moved out of range and had no more data. Costren looked at that record for a long time. 9 days, in a crawl space, sealed in foam. Heart rate dropped to something that should have been a death sign. She thought about Verith Sol's medical report, which she had also pulled. The 12 humans, their injuries. The crew chief who had relocated her own dislocated joint during the boarding, and was standing up and talking when the Keth soldiers reached her. She thought about 4 years from 80 million dead to first orbital vehicle. She opened a new document. She wrote her report slowly. She wrote it carefully. The clinical section was thorough. She described the observable behavioral and biological data, without editorializing the way she had been trained. She cited every probe record. She cross-referenced every data point. Then she got to the assessment section. She wrote, "This species does not behave like prey." She wrote, "Every available data point suggests a species with an anomalously high threshold for damage, physical, civilizational, and psychological, and an anomalously fast recovery curve from that damage. They do not avoid destruction. They survive it. They rebuild from it. They appear to treat catastrophe as a condition of existence, rather than an exception to it." She paused. She wrote, "Recommend reassessment before subjugation order proceeds." She flagged the report priority high and sent it to her supervisor, a senior analyst named Gethvor who had been in intake for 30 years. Never once had a priority high flag come back to bite him. She waited. The response came in 40 minutes. Assessment noted. Field commander's evaluation confirmed. Labor class designation approved. Standard subjugation order proceeds on schedule. That was all. Costren read it twice. She looked at the blinking approved stamp at the top of file 7714. She looked at the cold-pressed grain liquid. She opened a personal archive that existed outside the official system. Small, private. The kind of thing every analyst maintained for their own reference. The kind of thing that was technically against regulation and universally practiced. She copied her full report into it. Not Gethvor's dismissal, her report. The probe records, the anomaly file, the salvage data, all of it. She didn't know why she did it. She told herself it was habit. Good analysts kept their work. You never knew when a file would resurface. She closed the personal archive. She opened the next intake file. A species of gas breathers from Sector 12. No interstellar capacity. No threat profile. She began to read. Behind her, through the archive building's one narrow window, the capital world of Verith Prime moved through its afternoon. Streets full of Keth, going about the efficient and ordered business of the Empire. Tram lines running on their precise schedule, the spires of the War Council building, visible above the lower city, catching the light. Nobody was worried about anything. 83 light-years away, in Border Sector 7, the beacon had been transmitting for 19 hours. Something had been listening for the last 14 days. The humans had been aboard Verith Sol's ship for 14 days when the single vessel appeared at the border. It did not appear the way military ships appeared. No formation, no escort, no power signature ramping up across the long approach that gave a commander time to think. It dropped out of faster-than-light travel at medium range, which was either a navigational statement or a political one, and it held position without any thrust adjustment, sitting in space the way a stone sits at the bottom of a river. Velmoran had it on screen before Verithsol reached the bridge. One vessel, she said, mid-class. Drive signature, she paused. Drive signature is different from the scout ship. Different how? Bigger, much bigger. But the hull configuration is longer. Commander, I think it's also civilian. Verithsol looked at the screen. One ship, mid-class. Sitting there, broadcasting on all frequencies, in a way that was not aggressive and was not submissive, and was not anything he had a category for. He listened to the broadcast. 43 languages. He counted later. He had the system run the full catalog. 43, including 3 Keth dialects, one of which was a regional variation spoken only in the northern territories of Verith Prime that hadn't been used in formal communication in 60 years. The message was simple. We are here to discuss the return of our people. That was all. No threat attached, no deadline, no description of what would happen if the return did not occur. Just the statement, looping, patient, filling the frequencies the way water fills a shape, finding every available space and settling into it. Verithsol scrambled his patrol fleet. 12 warships, standard intercept formation. The kind of response that had ended conversations before they properly started with every species he had ever encountered. The math was simple and universal. 1 ship, 12 ships, stand down. The human vessel did not stand down. It slowed. Just slightly. The thrust reading changed, not powering up, not maneuvering, just adjusting. The way you adjusted when you arrived at a destination and were looking for somewhere to park. It kept broadcasting. He targeted the lead vessel on his formation and opened the command channel. This is Commander Verithsol of the Keth Imperial Patrol. You have entered restricted Imperial space. Power down your drive and prepare to be boarded. Silence, not the silence of a dead channel. The silence of someone who had heard and was thinking about what they'd heard. Then the broadcast changed. The 43-language message did not stop. But layered over it, on the direct command channel in Keth Standard came something new. We would prefer not to board. We are here to talk. Please respond. Verithsol looked at his gunner. The gunner looked at him. He fired a warning shot. 1 pulse. Targeted at a point 40 units off the vessel's port side. Close enough to be unambiguous, far enough to be technically a warning. The human vessel did not move. The shot hit it. The hull absorbed it, not deflected. Not shielded in the way Keth shielding worked. The energy scattering off a generated field. The hull took the shot and the readings on Velmoran's board showed a pulse of heat distribution across the hull surface, and then nothing. Gone. The ship sat there the same as before, the same thrust, the same position, and the broadcast continued. We would prefer not to board. We are here to talk. Please respond. Verithsol felt something move through him. His species did not have a word for what it was. They had words for threat assessment and tactical recalibration, and the specific cognitive state of encountering data that did not fit the model. None of those words were quite right. He said, put them on visual. She was sitting at a table. That was the first thing. She was sitting at a table in what appeared to be a meeting room. A real one, with a surface and chairs and a window behind her, showing the stars outside, unhurried and indifferent. She was not at a command station, not at a weapons console. At a table, the way you sat when you were meeting someone for a discussion you expected to take a while. She was wearing something that was clearly not a uniform. It had color and structure, and the specific look of clothing chosen for an occasion rather than a function. She looked, Verithsol thought, like she had dressed for an appointment. She said, "Hello, my name is Yemi Adeyemi. I'm an ambassador at large for the United Earth government. I'd like to speak with whoever is in charge." Just that. Her voice was level. Her hands were on the table, visible, a posture that his tactical training identified immediately as deliberate display of non-aggression, but not the display of something scared, the display of something experienced. "I am Commander Verith, Commander." She nodded. The nod had a specific quality, acknowledgement without deference. The nod of someone who had sat across from a lot of important people and had stopped being impressed by titles somewhere along the way. "I want to start by saying that we have no hostile intent. We fired no weapons when your fleet intercepted our scout vessel. We have fired no weapons since. We would like our people back, and then I think we have quite a lot to talk about." Verithsol said, "You are in Imperial space." "I am," she said. "I came here on purpose." It seemed more direct than waiting. "You absorbed a weapons discharge." She glanced to one side, the smallest movement, a fraction of a second, and said, "Yes, our hull is configured for your patrol fleet's standard armament. We've had time to study it." He sat with that. We've had time to study it. How long, he said, have you been watching us? She looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face, not the translator's category of amusement, not quite. Something older than amusement. Something that had amusement in its ancestry, a few generations back. She said, that is genuinely a great question for a second meeting. The captured crew was brought to the communication room. Standard procedure. Show them to the incoming vessel. Confirm they were alive. 12 humans filed in with the specific movement of people who had been in a confined space for 2 weeks. And were not going to show how much that had cost them. They stood. They looked at the screen. Dara Osi was at the front. She looked at Adeyemi. Adeyemi looked at her. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. The kind of look that carried a full briefing in it. Osi said 2 words. The Keth translators were on full capture. They caught both. The first word, a name. Adeyemi's name, shortened, the way you shortened a name when you knew someone well. The second word, stall. Adeyemi's expression did not change. Not a muscle. She was already looking back at Verith Sol when he turned to face her, already mid-sentence, already talking about the legal frameworks of territorial contact under what she called emerging interstellar conventions, and the question of whether a species had to formally register a boundary for that boundary to be binding, and what constituted prior notification, and 3 other threads that Verith Sol's translator was rendering in real time while his tactical mind tried to figure out what he had just seen. Stall. She was stalling. The question was for what? She was good at it, that was the thing. She was not stalling in the way a frightened creature stalled, repeating itself, losing the thread, talking faster to fill silence. She was stalling the way a river stalled around a rock. It looked like it was just moving, doing the thing water did, and you had to watch it for a while before you noticed it wasn't going anywhere. She asked him questions, good questions, about the Empire, its history, its structure, its expansion patterns. She was curious in a way that felt real, which meant either it was real or she was the best performer he had ever encountered. She took notes on something off-screen. She said, fascinating. Twice and, as I see. Many times, and she never looked like she was managing him. She just looked like she was interested. 2 hours in, a member of her crew brought her a drink. She thanked him. She took a slow sip. She set it down precisely. The drink was hot. It steamed slightly. 3 hours in, she asked about Keth agricultural policy on absorbed worlds, which was either the most boring question he had ever been asked in a military context, or the most brilliant, and he found himself answering it in genuine detail, while part of his mind floated above the conversation, and tried to understand what was happening. 4 hours in, she started talking about infrastructure. 5 hours in, Velmorin passed him a note. Sir, long-range sensors are reading background movement at the boundary of their space. Cannot yet classify. He looked at it. He looked at Adeyemi. She was asking him something about Keth building materials. The drink was gone. At some point she had finished it and he had not noticed. He said, cutting across the question, Ambassador. She stopped, looked at him, patient. What is on my long-range sensors? She did not look at anything off-screen. She did not pause to check. She already knew. I'd expect you're starting to see our border patrol, she said. Standard sector coverage. It takes them a little while to come online at this range. Border patrol, yes, how many vessels? She picked up a stylus from the table, turned it once in her hand, set it down. Enough, she said. 6 hours in, Verith Sol had 12 warships, a captured crew, and a woman sitting at a table across from him drinking something hot and talking about infrastructure. And on his long-range sensors, at the edge of resolution, something was resolving, and it was big, and it was still getting bigger, and she knew it was there. Had known the whole time, and had asked him about building materials. He looked at Dara Ose, standing in the corner of the communication room. She was watching Adeyemi with the specific attention of someone watching a thing they had seen before, and trusted completely. Stall. The single syllable sat in his mind like a stone dropped into deep water, still sinking, not yet at the bottom. The operator's name was Hesforan, and she had worked the long-range sensor board for 6 years without once filing an anomaly report. She filed one at the 18th minute of the 19th day. Then she ran the diagnostic. Then she filed a second one. Then she sat very still and looked at her board, and thought about the specific kind of career-ending embarrassment that came from sending 2 consecutive anomaly reports that turned out to be equipment error, and she ran the diagnostic again. The equipment was fine. She called her supervisor. Her supervisor looked at the board, said nothing for 11 seconds, called his supervisor. That supervisor called the Border Fleet Coordinator. The Border Fleet Coordinator called Vareth Sol. Vareth Sol was in the middle of a conversation about water reclamation systems. He had been in the middle of a conversation about water reclamation systems for approximately 22 minutes, which followed 40 minutes about load-bearing structural tolerances in low-gravity construction, which followed an hour and 15 minutes about the linguistic roots of Keth territorial designation law, all of which had been delivered by Yemi Adeyemi in the pleasant and unhurried tone of someone who had nowhere else to be and genuinely found the subject interesting. The notification from Fleet Coordination landed on his secondary screen. He read it again. He looked at Adeyemi. She was drinking her second cup of whatever the hot liquid was. She had asked for a second cup 40 minutes ago, and a member of his crew, without being ordered to, had brought her one. She had not addressed it, because addressing it would have required deciding what it meant, and she was waiting for him to finish his thought about the Eastern Territorial Conventions of the Keth Third Expansion Period. He did not finish his thought. He said, "Ambassador." She looked up. "What is on my long-range sensors?" Not a question. The sentence had the shape of a question and none of the uncertainty. She set the cup down, precisely, the same way she had set down the stylus, the same careful placement, the specific habit of a person who had learned to control small things because large things were always slightly out of reach. "I'd expect you're seeing our border patrol coming fully online," she said. "This sector takes a little while to light up at your sensor range. The curvature is inconvenient." "How many?" She looked at him the way Dara Osi had looked at him in the interrogation room, not performing calm, just wearing it, the way you wore a coat you'd owned for years. "Enough," she said. On Vareth Prime, the anomaly report hit the Imperial War Council at the start of their morning session. The council had 17 members. They were, collectively, the military and strategic mind of an empire that spanned 64 star systems and had absorbed or removed 31 spacefaring species in 800 years of expansion. They had never lost a subjugation action. They had never reversed an intake classification. They looked at the sensor data for a long time without speaking. The senior analyst, not Kostren, a different one, older, who had been in the position for 20 years, and had the specific confidence of someone who had never been wrong in a way that mattered, pulled up the scale reference. He put the incoming formation next to the Empire's full border fleet. The room was very quiet. One council member, in the back left, said, "Is the equipment confirmed functional?" said the analyst. 4 independent arrays, consistent reading across all 4. Another member, classification, forward screen, fast attack configuration. Behind that, carrier class heavy. Behind that, he stopped. Behind that, the system won't classify them. Unknown class. The field just reads unknown, all of them. Unknown. Unknown. The words sat in the air of the council chamber like smoke. Someone pulled the file. File 7714. Species intake record, labor class designation. Approved 19 days ago. Someone else pulled Kostren's report, the one that had been dismissed in 40 minutes. They read it now. Slowly. The paragraph about civilizational recovery rates. The paragraph about the pilot in the crawl space. "This species does not behave like prey." The council member in the back left said quietly, "Get me Geth 4. Vareth Sol was counting. He had told himself he would not count. Counting was a thing you did when you needed a number to orient yourself. And he had decided he did not need a number. That whatever the number was, his response would be the same, professional, measured. He counted anyway. He got to 400. And the formation was still resolving on the edge of his sensors, still filling in. More contacts appearing at the boundary of resolution the way stars appeared at the edge of vision when your eyes adjusted to dark. One, then another, then too many to count individually, just a field of ships, all of them moving in the specific organized patience of a fleet that had done this before. Not the hurried movement of a response force, not the tight, anxious clustering of a defensive posture, the wide, measured spacing of something that moved like this every day. Routine. The word sat in his mind like a stone in a boot. Routine. He opened the channel to Adeyemi. She was still at the table. The cup was in her hands. Steam rose from it. She had at some point gotten a third one, and he had not noticed when. He said, "What I am seeing on my sensors. Tell me what it is." She looked at him across the distance between them. 83 light years of hard space reduced to a signal, a screen, 2 faces. "I want to be honest with you," she said. "What you're seeing, that is not our military." The bridge was quiet. Vel Moran, at the sensor board, did not look up. She was watching her readings. The contacts kept resolving, still coming online, still filling the edge of the display. Verithsol said. Then what is it? It's our second wave, she said. Our Border Defense Force. Standard patrol coverage for this sector. They rotate out every 3 years. She took a sip, set the cup down. Routine, he looked at her. He looked at Dara Ose, standing in the corner of the communication room, her arm no longer held against her body, back to full use. 2 weeks of Keth medical non-intervention, apparently sufficient for a fracture to mostly sort itself out. Osi was watching Adeyemi with the expression of someone watching a person they had trusted with something heavy. Our first wave already came, Adeyemi said. You met them. Silence. 12 people on a scout ship. The sensor board behind Velmoran showed 400 and something contacts and still resolving. 12 people. The woman who relocated her own shoulder. The one with the old burns who stood straight. The one who had offered a Keth soldier a food ration. 12 people on a civilian vessel, outdated by the look of it, hull repair visible from the outside, and they had walked off it into a boarding action like it was a Tuesday. I've had worse Tuesdays. Verithsol understood, in the way you understood something that was too large to understand all at once, that Dara Ose had not been joking. Adeyemi was still talking. The fleet you're seeing is our border coverage, standard rotation. It's not a military action, they were already coming. Your situation just gave them a destination. She set the cup down again. Our military is still at home. She looked at him, directly, without performance. Would you like me to keep talking, she said. Or would you like to return our people and we can discuss terms? On Verith Prime, the council chamber had not moved in 4 minutes. Someone asked the question that nobody had put language to yet. How long have they known where we are? The room did not answer. The senior analyst looked at the formation on the display, looked at the scale reference, looked at unknown, unknown, unknown. Classification fields stacked like a column of missing answers. He looked at cost trends report. They have been evaluating us. The word, evaluating, sat differently now than it had 19 days ago. He thought about the scout vessel, civilian grade, outdated looking. Hull repair in a different color material. 12 people who walked into a boarding action without flinching, and one of them had relocated her own shoulder in the middle of it. He thought about the beacon they hadn't found for 4 hours. He thought about the ambassador who had arrived alone in a ship, with a hull configured for the patrol fleet's standard armament. We've had time to study it. He thought about the question he could not answer and understood, slowly, in the specific cold way that understanding arrived when it was too late to use, that the humans had known where they were for a very long time. The question was not, how long? The question, the one nobody in the room was ready to ask yet, was what they had decided to do about it, and hadn't, until now. They gave them back in an escape pod. Not a shuttle, not a transport. An escape pod, the Keth version, small and silver and shaped like a seed, with full life support and a navigation beacon and nothing else. It was, Verithsol knew, the highest formal gesture of de-escalation in Keth diplomatic protocol. The kind of gesture that cost an empire something. The War Council had approved it in 6 minutes. 6 minutes. A council that had debated agricultural policy for 11 hours on a Thursday had looked at the sensor data, looked at the formation still filling the border, like a tide that had decided to stop being metaphorical about it, and approved the release in 6 minutes. Verithsol watched the pod go. He watched it until his sensors handed it off. The Meridian's shuttle bay, swallowing it whole, quick and precise, the way a large animal accepted something small without thinking about it. He held position. He waited. Dara Ose had spent 2 weeks in a Keth bunk that was the wrong shape for a human spine, and she was never going to say that out loud because complaining about the bunk was the kind of thing you did after, and they weren't after yet. The pod hit the shuttle bay, and the mag clamps took it, and the pressure equalized in the particular groan of metal accepting metal, and then the hatch opened, and she walked out into the Meridian. Her crew followed her, all 12, all present, nobody had to be carried. She had thought about this moment, not planned for it, not exactly, but the way you thought about certain rooms before you entered them, building the picture. She had expected something military. She had expected the smell of a warship. Meridian smelled like a cafeteria and machine oil, and the specific warm dust smell of a large enclosed space where a lot of people had been living for a long time. It smelled like home. Lieutenant Carver was waiting at the bay entrance, young, tall, the particular expression of someone who had prepared a formal welcome and abandoned it the moment the hatch opened. He said, "Chief Osei," she said. "Lieutenant," he said. "You look, don't." He closed his mouth. She walked past him into the corridor, her crew spread out behind her, the 12 of them moving through the meridians. Wide passage the way water moved through a familiar channel. She passed soldiers, engineers, a group of 3 people arguing loudly about a power routing problem, hands moving, nobody paying attention to the returned crew, because the meridian was a ship where 12 people coming back from something bad was not, in the full arc of history, the most remarkable thing to have happened this week. She passed the mess hall. She stopped, looked in, children, 7 of them, 8 maybe, seated at a long table with what appeared to be some kind of educational material spread across it, supervised by a woman who was not in uniform, supervised by a woman who looked up and nodded at Dara, with the nod of someone who knew what Dara's last 2 weeks had probably looked like and was choosing correctly to say nothing about it. The children did not look up. They were arguing about something, loudly. 2 of them had the same piece of material and were pulling it in opposite directions with the specific focused commitment of creatures who had not yet developed object permanence as a concept. Dara watched them for 3 seconds. She walked on. Adeyemi's after-action debrief was in a small room off the main command bay, and it was, by the standards of after-action debriefs, extremely strange. Osi sat across from her, no recorder, no other officers. Just the 2 of them and a table that was slightly better than the Keth interrogation table in the specific way that mattered. It was the right height. Adeyemi had changed out of the meeting clothes. She was in something plain now. She had a cup of coffee, real coffee, not the pressed grain liquid, actual coffee that smelled like altitude and dark soil, and the kind of mornings that existed on one specific planet, and she slid a second cup across to Dara without comment. Dara wrapped both hands around it. She said, "How long were you talking to him?" 6 hours and change. About what? Infrastructure, territorial law, building materials for about 40 minutes. Osi looked at her. He was good, Adeyemi said, not complimenting him, just noting it the way you noted weather. He stayed present the whole time. Most of them start drifting around hour 2. He kept asking actual questions. Osi drank the coffee. She thought about Vareth Saul in the interrogation room, his membrane close blink, the specific quality of his attention, not dismissive, not afraid. Assessing. The whole time. She had been doing the same thing to him and they had both known it and neither of them had said so, which was the kind of thing that made 2 weeks in a wrong-shaped bunk feel like it had been worth something. She said, "They'll be back." "Yes," Adeyemi said. "Different posture next time." "I expect so." Osi turned the cup in her hands. The coffee was very good. Someone on the meridian had calibrated the machine right. She was going to think about that for a moment before she thought about anything else. The temperature, the specific bitterness at the back of the tongue, the warmth spreading through the muscles of her hands, where the dislocation had made everything stiff. Small things first, then the rest. She said, "Did they see the second formation?" "Yes," said Adeyemi, "we made sure." "And the signature behind it?" Adeyemi looked at her cup. "Also visible," she said, "on Vareth Prime." The after-action report hit the War Council on the morning of day 20. It was 4 pages. The analyst who wrote it, not the senior one, not Geth4 Kostren, pulled from her desk at hour 6 of day 19, given the SIR data and the communication transcripts, and the full record of everything that had happened since file 7. 7-4 landed in her intake queue. 4 pages. She had written faster than she had ever written anything. The first 3 pages were the clinical section, chronological. Everything that had happened, what the humans had done, what the Empire had done, how each action had been interpreted and misinterpreted and reinterpreted in real time. She wrote it without editorializing. She did not need to editorialize. The sequence spoke. The 4th page was 1 paragraph. She had rewritten it 7 times. The final version read, "The scout vessel was not a probe. It was a test. The humans allowed us to capture their crew to observe our behavior under controlled conditions. The ambassador was not sent to negotiate. She was sent to confirm our response. They have been watching us for a period we cannot determine. They configured their vessel for our armament before the first contact. They sent 12 people into a boarding action to see how we treated prisoners. They sent 1 diplomat to see how we responded to a single unarmed vessel. The border fleet was already coming. The formation behind it was already positioned. None of this was reactive. All of it was prepared. We were never evaluating them. They were evaluating us. The question the Council should be asking is not what the humans want. The question is what they decided." The Council read it in silence. One member eventually said, "What did they decide?" Nobody answered. Adeyemi closed the after-action file. It was thorough, clinical, the kind of report she had been writing for 22 years across 9 first contacts in 6-star systems, on behalf of a species that had learned the hard way, on its own skin, on its own soil, in its own history books. What happened when you met something bigger than you and didn't have a plan? The humans had been that thing once. More than once, if she was being precise about it. They had stopped being that thing, not by becoming the biggest, by becoming the most patient, by learning, across a very long and very expensive education, the difference between strength you displayed and strength you kept in reserve. The strength you kept in reserve was the only kind that mattered. She read the last line of her report back to herself. First contact assessment, provisional. Species shows potential. Recommend continued monitoring and graduated diplomatic engagement. They made the right choice today. That matters. She closed it, filed it, picked up the coffee cup and found it empty and did not get another one. Behind her, meridians. Main display showed the full spread of human space. The border, the patrol formation, the second formation holding position in the dark behind it, the vast depth of settled systems running back toward the core, and at the core a marker, small blinking, no classification field, no label. Not because it was unknown, because it was known very, very well, by the people who had sent it, by the people who would receive the message it carried in approximately 6 days, depending on the drive efficiency of the class of ship that bore it. The class of ship that had been under construction for 11 years. The class that had no Keth designation. The class, the Vineyard. Meridians. Own crew did not have clearance to know the full specifications of. Moving outward toward the border. At speed, Adeyemi turned off the display. She went to find Dara Ose and ask about the wrong-shaped bunk, because some things you asked about, and some things you let a person come to when they were ready. Behind her the display was dark, but the marker was still there, still moving. Nobody told the Keth about that part.